with your little pile of 25. But right here in the studio with us right now we have Shawn Lamb. Thank you very much for coming, Shawn. And a little bit quicker than you were scheduled. Mr. McAdams was sick, so all right, I'm glad you could come.
So now I don't know where I'm going. I got a little bit surprised. You looked at me, and you not only are you the head of the Arts Council, but you are also the protectorate of a lot of our archive and a lot of the material that relates to Nelson's past and history. When was the, maybe you could, we could start, maybe you could give me a little information as to background. When was the first election ever held in Nelson?
Well, the first election was right after the incorporation of the city. The city was incorporated in 1897 in March, and the letters patent were delivered a couple of weeks later, and then there was an election called. And it was very hotly contested because John Houston, who'd been an old-timer in Nelson, was the editor of their newspaper, and was a strong proponent of the things he believed in. It was very strong, and people were either for him or against him. And that first election was very strongly contested. Houston persuaded 6, I think, of his best friends to run for council. Huh. They were very good men from the community. There was a postmaster, a druggist, you know, a whole crew of them. And he and his entire slate were elected. So, of course, there was great jubilation because, I mean, there they were. They had all the power. There was nobody against them. So they could have a free rein with the things that they had campaigned on. At the end of the election, people in Nelson went out into the streets, and there were barrels of oil placed all over the street, and people grabbed a broom out of Mr. Dow's hardware store and took the broom and dipped it in the oil and lit it on fire. And they had this incredible torchlight parade. I mean, it was stuff for movies, you know, it's just incredible. And they hoisted Houston up on the arms of 6 200-pound men, packed him down. I mean, can you imagine doing this today? Packed him down the main street for about 5 blocks, chanting what they said in the paper was, and I wish we had the words, the Houston Yell. You know, it sounded like a basketball game or something. And singing. And there was a party, I guess, all night long.
Did they end up in one of the local bars?
Oh, of course.
Of course,
yeah. Houston always had local bars. So it was quite neat to read this and realize, you know, the kind of public spirit there was, and they had a great time. Council didn't meet the next morning. It met a day later. And they got right down to business, and some of the issues there are quite interesting because they're issues that are still with us today. Houston was in favor of public ownership of utilities. And you know, it's hard to believe, but that was a really controversial thing in those days. And he was in favor of the city taking over what was the Consumers Waterworks Company, which was a conglomeration of men who got together, formed a company, and supplied water to the city. And it was, you know, the town was starting to boom, and they were realizing this was not going to be adequate, and there were going to have to be changes. So he was in favor of the city taking that over. And also the electric light facility, which at that time was on Cottonwood Creek, which didn't supply enough water for a proper amount of power. And there was dimming of your lights when when everybody turned their light on, everybody's went brown. And it was pretty sad. So Houston, you know, he really had to fight to say, okay, this is a worthwhile investment for the city. He was subsequently re-elected in 98 and 99. Then he got elected to provincial government, and he sat there for a number of years, although he got into a lot of problems there. And then he came back for one more year in, I think, 1904, might be 1905, and was the mayor once more. And he came back and ran again because they'd realized that this power utility was not going to work, and they had to get something down on the river. And he came back to get that kind of cemented, you know, that they would have that Bonington power plant. So, you know, when I heard Donna the other night at the public meeting talking about that it's a positive thing to be the person on council that does the power thing, I really thought back to Houston and his fights to get those rights on the river and to get us a power plant there. He was a wonderful character. He hated the CPR. And that was another thing that was really interesting, watching Marty and some of the others at the meetings the other night getting asked what they would do with that dream, with that land down at the end there.
I mean, down at the end.
The CPR land.
That's right.
Did he have a vision for that land?
And Houston was very against the CPR getting all that land. And that was the conditions under which they would come here. Am I talking too long?
No, no.
No, keep
okay.
going. No, this is very
Okay,
interesting.
Van Horn, the president of the CPR, came in here, and he looked at this little railroad that they built from Castlegar to Nelson, well, Sproats Landing to Nelson, to connect with the two lakes together so that people could come, you know, up and down the lake by 20 miles or whatever it is, 25 miles of railroad, you know, and then another big set of lakes they could travel on, so they could hook up with the Revelstoke and the highways. And the Cross-Canada Railway. So, but Van Horn took a look at this and the emptiness here, and he said, this is a railway going from nowhere to nowhere. And it's ridiculous. And he didn't see any future for it. And so in order to have the okay for that railway here, he demanded a very, very hard bargain from the city. And the hard bargain was an equal of half the lots, like they wanted half the unsold lots in the town, something like that. They wanted the whole waterfront, they wanted mineral rights all along their right-of-way, a lot of things, so that they could bring in industries to be along the railroad and get, that's why our railway, our waterfront was industrial, was because of this bargain that the city made. So it's interesting, and Houston was very against the CPR and the kind of bargains that they would drive to communities. They also were tax-free for 10 years. So, but of course they had to pay for the incredible investment they were going to make. And the bargain, in a way, did do us a lot of good. It did bring in, capital and investment and so forth. But Houston had a war on with them all the time. He had a number of wars. Some people think he was just a drunk and really not a very good person, but the city clerk, the equivalent of Mr. Ormond today, who worked with him day in, day out for many years, spoke about him once at a meeting, the city meeting, and he said that he loved the city, he had incredible vision, he was most appreciated at the time, and that under that bare exterior there was a wonderful heart, and that there was never anyone whose need was expressed to Houston who went away without something, and without some satisfaction, and he was a pretty wonderful man. So that's about all I know about the first election and its follow-up.
Any other colorful mayors that you heard?
Well, I just thought one other person I could tell you about, because we had two ladies running for mayor, was our first lady that ran for mayor.
Oh, yeah.
And women's suffrage came in just before the 1920s, and Mrs. Garland Foster, who worked for the Nelson Daily News, ran for alderman in 1920 and was elected. And she was a reporter and her husband was a war hero. And if you look at her picture in City Hall, looks like she knows her stuff. And in 1921, she ran for mayor, but she was defeated.
By
a lot?
I can't remember exactly what the figures are. Then she backed out of city politics after that. Maybe there had just been too much. She realized that it wasn't possible to be mayor. So that was interesting, I thought. Yeah, we've had a number of colorful mayors through the years. So, Mr. Carey, who was often I think of Gerald in his suits and things. I remember Mr. Carey in the 50s, who used to be an auctioneer often at public, fundraising auctions and things like that. And Mr. Magview, of course, very colorful mayor, and who comes from a family of Nelson history. And
So, Shawn, how long have you lived here?
well, I came in. Well, you're asking me how old I am.
No, I'm not going to ask you
Yes, Shawn, how old are you?
No, I came here in 1942. My dad was transferred here, and I lived here till 1956, when I went away to school and got married and traveled around a bit and came back in 64. So I'm really a Nelsonite.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
You came here as a very, very young child.
Yep, 3.
3. Well, you heard it first. Okay. All right. So you've seen Nelson go through a fair amount of changes.
Yeah.
And I feel that, I mean, what's been happening lately has been very positive.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I was here for the boom in the 70s. We got our tax assessment, and it had, like everyone else's in town, gone up, or pretty well everybody's, and I got out of my old ones to look up, and it's exactly the same as it was in '82.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The one that you just got lately?
The one we just got is the same as the one we had in '82, and I remember the boom before the recession.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I remember a great influx of people moving in, and of course when the university was going and all
Yes.
the mills and everything, the town was full. There wasn't anywhere to rent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we got the, we had to find a piece of property to build the museum in 1971 or 2 in there when the centennial of BC's joining Canada. There was no available land anywhere. That's why we ended up where we are, because it was the only available piece of property on a public highway.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you think back, and there have been these boom full times before when people were turning apartments, in their basements into apartments and taking in students and that. And I don't think they had very much of that in the 20s and 30s. I think it was pretty quiet. But it started to boom again after the war.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that for the civic government, for our city government, that the issues have remained the same over the last nearly 100 years? You talked about the waterfront being an issue in 1897. It's still an issue today.
Yeah.
You know, the other issues that they're talking about today, are they the same issues?
No, they're not the same issues. When the museum did that exhibition last year, and I did the texts for these photographs of up till 1897, I found this wonderful text about all the smoke pouring out of the smelter and the sawmills along the waterfront, in which it was said that the more of that, the better. That meant money. And I thought, some things have really changed, you know.
A lot.
And there was not the consciousness of how fragile everything is. It was interesting that one of our early explorers, W.A. Bailey Groman, came in here in the 1880s when it was almost a pristine wilderness. And by 1896, he was writing conservationist things because he'd seen people dynamiting little lakes
Yeah.
to get fish, to kill
Oh.
fish, and then gather them up and take them to work in their camps.
Uh-huh.
And of course, I don't know if our, you know, people, there was a common practice among prospectors in those days to burn off a hillside and then
Right.
come back in the spring to
Yeah.
see what minerals were shown. There are practices that, because they felt like the wilderness would go on forever, that I think that the fact that our native people moved out of here and moved to Colville Indian Reserve in the case of the Lakes Indians, and to the reserves at Creston and Cranbrook and Invermere area, very, very early, is because they felt the threat to the environment because they were living from it,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't. You know, you couldn't live from it in the midst of the industrial activity that was going on. And that, you know, those issues have taken time to develop. And there is, you know, the waterfront, yes, but for different reasons. I don't think it was in order to keep it for the public that Houston was against it.
Uh-huh.
Its development. I think it was more that Nelson should develop it itself. It shouldn't be governed by CPR's control. Because, of course, the CPR would sell land to people that were going to ship Canadian, and he was very aware that how close we are to the States and that we had a very important role
Right.
to play through that railroad that had been here since 1893 that went to Spokane.
1893.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And all the early traffic was up from Bonners Ferry and up that way. So, you know, we had this very strong north-south connection.
Okay.
Are they getting ready
Yeah,
to do
yeah,
an interview?
No,
Can we hold on to
just-
Shawn for a little bit?
Yeah, we'll hold on to Shawn for a little bit, but we are going to go to Central School now, as I understand, to Marianne. Hi, Marianne.
Hi, Marianne.
Oh, good.
She doesn't have her earphone in.
Hello again, Heather, Nelson. Hi, Shawn. With me is Shawn Leslie from KBS Radio and Patrick Fowler once again from the Nelson Daily News. They have some updates on what's happening outside of Nelson. Shawn, to you first.
Yeah, I've just been listening to our own coverage on KBS, and it appears that Gordon Gaskell has defeated incumbent Mayor Jack Morris in Kaslo. I don't have the figures. I didn't catch the figures, but it is surprising in that I guess Morris has been the mayor for 10 years. Gaskell's been an alderman for 2 years and campaigned on a platform of fiscal responsibility. So apparently that struck a chord with the voters. Again, Gordon Gaskell beating Jack Morris in Kaslo in the mayoralty race, and I don't have the figures, but that is apparently the results in Kaslo.
Thank you, Shawn. I know you're going to be busy phoning back into KBS shortly. We
Yes,
won't catch you on the
we're
news
doing
again,
live
but-
coverage, so I have to get some results on as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And Patrick, you indicated you have some figures for us.
Yeah, we have some results from Area E, and they're still waiting for one polling station here, actually at Central School, to report back. But it looks like Josh Schmink has 462, and Richard Bridge has 462 for Josh Schmink, who's the incumbent, and Richard Bridge has 165. And so those aren't totals yet, and the returns seem fairly sporadic. In Area F, which has Dick Hamakawa and Burl Fossey, Burl has 141 and Hamakawa has 131, and those are just a few of the polls reporting in, and that's very preliminary as well.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm sure you can keep us updated as the evening goes along.
Sure.
Again, Nelson and Heather, we haven't had any kind of tally from the tables yet. It looks like, I don't know, Gary, can you get a shot of the room yet again? It looks like the piles are starting to build on the tables. We should be getting some kind of numbers fairly soon.
Okay.
When we come back at the next spot, Bill Heflin has indicated he'll come on camera for a short interview as well. So it's back to you guys in the studio.
Okay. Thanks very much, Marianne. Well, that was certainly astounding news from Kaslo. Mr. Morris has been in there for quite a long time, hasn't he, Shawn? Yeah. Anyway, back here we are in the studio again with Shawn Lamb from the museum and from the Arts Council.
And from the archives.
And from the archives. Do you have a wish list? We didn't ask you this before, but do you have a wish list for Nelson, just out of the city of?
Oh my goodness. Well, I do. I have a wish list that people of every kind of talent will have an opportunity to develop it, whether it's artistic or whatever else. My interest is the arts, but I see there's other talents, that need people to have that chance to develop them. I wish that the arts would be seen as a part of what keeps a community hopeful and happy and self-aware, and that this requires a commitment from the community to the structures that will keep the arts available, to the staffing and the buildings and the assistance that's needed. And I don't mean just the city council, I mean the private people in the city as well. I wish that our visitors that will come here would be able to participate in our life here and be able to enjoy what we have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't wish that they would control us by their numbers or their, or by their tastes. And I hope that our future council And I feel hopeful that they will make decisions that will allow that to be. In the work I've been doing the last 5 years in the museum, or 6 years now, I've seen many people come to Nelson, and they're usually people who come because of what we have here, in the sense of a city that's remained friendly. We don't have a strip. We don't have overcrowding. You have to discover it to a large extent. And I think they really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
They want guidance. They want to know how to do that.
Yeah.
But they don't want to be herded.
Right.
And that's the sort of people that seem to find their way here. Now, whether they're the beginning of the wave and the more adventurous or a trend,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see them be that they were a trend.
Yeah.
Because I think we have the kinds of things that are nice to discover and possible to discover
Mm-hmm.
on your own. I guess the other things I wish is the things that a lot of people wish. I wish, having been part of Notre Dame University, I went there myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was in one of the first classes when it was Notre Dame College. I would like to see the university, a university, restored here. I'd like to see Nelson University Center expand and offer a fine arts degree. I'd like to see a possibility of something like our Summer School of the Arts that the Arts Council took up when the summer school, when the university closed down, become something that could offer longer courses, fuller courses, so that people could plan their vacations, so that they could participate in that sort of life. I'd like to see an art gallery, like a real one, not a basement. I don't know why art always gets relegated to basements. We have some wonderful basement galleries in the Kootenay region, but it's time it got out on the top floor,
Mm-hmm.
It really is. And the Capitol made me very hopeful of that. Such a classy facility and so nice to perform in, and such a lovely way to host our performers that come to town.
Oh, it is.
They love to perform there. I've talked
Uh-huh.
many times with the Purcells. Well, you know that, Heather.
Right.
The Purcells love performing there.
Yeah.
And they'd come back here for less money if we couldn't afford them, just because they love to perform in the Capitol, and I'm sure there's lots of others like that.
Oh, yeah. No, we found that through Oasis Productions. Everybody that comes here and plays in the Capitol Theater, first they're astounded
Yeah.
that there's this quality of a building here in this small town, and then they go in and they listen to the acoustics, and they're very, very surprised. And
Yeah.
then the quality of the audience is very appreciative all the time,
Right.
and who they have to work with. I don't know if you heard Gerald Rotering when he spoke.
No, I didn't.
But we asked him, what do you think, what was the best thing you feel about your whole term in office? And he said, the Capitol Theater.
Yeah. Yes.
With everything else that had happened.
Oh, yes, and that, we're not all happy with books and crooks, but that the library can spread out.
Right.
That's another accomplishment of that administration. That's pretty wonderful, because that's I think they were looking for a home for the library before 1900.
Is that right?
Yeah. Mrs. Roderick Robertson, whose husband was the London and BC Goldfields man in Nelson, and she lived in that big old house behind the glass place down at the end of Baker Street. She was on the first library committee, and they held dances and you name it to try to get a library for Nelson. You think, my God, we're going to go our 2nd century looking for a library. Also, it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
I have other things I'd like to see. I'd like to see the waterfront, completed. I'd like to see some better places for people to stay when they come here.
Yes.
With their campers or whatever, and in hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Not better, but just more.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting to that point, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how you do that. I'm not that sort of, I don't have those sort of abilities to think that way, but I'm sure that there are people who are. I'd just like to see us continue to be able to meet our neighbors of whoever they are. That was one of the wonderful things growing up here, was that you rubbed shoulders with everybody.
Yeah.
And those town meetings we've had the last two or three nights, everybody's there.
That's great.
And it's really nice, and I wouldn't like to see us lose that.
I have one, for myself, one last question.
Yeah?
Okay.
I would like to know if, I mean, you've seen and read about a lot of our city governments and seen them come and go and get elected, lose an election, run again, get re-elected. Do you have any advice that you would give, this a little bit related to this last question, but do you have any advice that you would give this new council and new mayor that's coming in now for the next 3 years?
Ooh. I think it's a whole new ball game to have a clean slate.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
That's a scary one. They used to re-elect, like when Houston ran, it was every year.
Mm-hmm.
The whole council.
Everybody out, elect them again.
Sounds very democratic.
But the way that transfer payments, like from province and all those sorts of things happen now, it takes a lot longer to have. You have to have 3-year plans. Even the Arts Council has to have a 3-year plan. 3 years makes sense. But it is, I think it's really important that the new council, especially if most of them are new, which I don't know, but who knows what's going to turn out.
We don't.
We're waiting.
Should appreciate what's gone before and really try to understand why certain decisions were made in the past. Because we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes if we don't examine what went on in the past and understand why maybe certain decisions which were the worst, there were 2 worsts and you picked the best you could.
Yeah.
The best of the worst.
The best of the worst in many cases, and I can think of a number of things, but I'm not going to talk about that. And that if they understand that, then you kind of feel yourself in a continuum, and it doesn't mean that we always have to be looking back. It gives you that springboard to go forward with, and to understand the citizens and where they're coming from, and why they feel strongly about some things, and why they love certain things, like the Capitol or the streetcar, because it meant so much.
Right.
Or why they hate certain things, because maybe they really got ripped off once before or something, or weren't listened to. So I would say that, if they have a chance. But they don't have to go and read in the archives, but they could ask. Ask the people that work at City Hall.
Right.
Why is this?
So, yeah, there's a lot of good resources at the City Hall. I could say Lil Olson is a wonderful resource. She's been there for 23 years now, and very helpful anytime I've gone down there and asked something, and this is a person who knows what's going on.
Yeah. And I wish them, I think it's a wonderful time. No wonder so many people came out to run.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Everything's so positive.
It is very positive,
And
isn't it?
and it's only sort of a choosing between, what's better this time. And that's so much better in lots of ways. So, yeah.
Well, I think we should let Shawn go now. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I think the next thing that we could probably do is go for a public service announcement.